This is the E-Learning Podcast, episode number 33.
It's all about an audio first content creation process. I think it's the most cost efficient and it's the most learner friendly, as we'll talk about today. It creates content in just about every format.
Welcome to the E-Learning Podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. My guest today is on a mission to change the way you create e-learning content into an audio-first e-learning strategy. Michael Greenburg believes that if you get audio in terms of the quality of the recording and the content, every other part of your course will have a solid footing. But not only that, by being the one effective method that does not need your eyes, audio increases your learning opportunities. In this ear-opening conversation, we talk about why audio is such an important piece of the learning experience and why, paradoxically, it is one of the least taken care of. We also talk about Michael's 3 key steps to get started with a quality audio-first learning experience. We also talk about the many ways you can turn audio content into a variety of formats and experiences, or in Michael's case, a promising business model. We talk about also the benefits of stepping up your audio game for anything from your confidence as a public speaker to the way you make content intrinsically compelling. And finally, we talk about the limitations of audio-only learning, which is to say that in many cases, audio can play a fortifying role when used along with other media. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The E-Learning Podcast is sponsored by the E-Learning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be on today.
Michael, I asked this to everybody, where do we find you sitting today? You're in this room that has been vacated of all people, I'm assuming for COVID, but who knows, whatever. Where are you sitting today?
So I am sitting in an apartment that I was not planning on being in any longer in Denver, Colorado. I'm supposed to be in Cape Town right now.
You're supposed to be, holy smokes, you're in the wrong part of the planet, my friend. Although I got to say, as people know who listen to the show, I'm from Colorado, so it's not a bad place to be. I mean, Colorado's pretty hip. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay. So we're recording this, kind of almost mid-October 2020, just for posterity. I asked this of everybody, how's your COVID been and what's it look like right now?
So I am in the podcasting business. As lockdown occurred, our lead flow increased. We saw about a 3x interest.
Wow.
I have a fully remote team. We started planning for COVID towards the end of January. And so by the time it actually hit, we were ready.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's great to hear.
I'm paranoid. What can I say?
Virtual teams, remote work, e-learning, our usual audience. And before I even say that, you are the chief strategic thinker. You're the chief strategist at a place at a website called callforcontent.com. And you also just told me pre-show that you recently spun out Podcast 360, which is a post-production service that you provide for podcasts as well.
Yeah.
Most of the people who are listening to this are going to ask me, Laddick, what does podcasting have to do with e-learning, right? Most of the people on this show either come from a pedagogy background, a learning management system background, something that's like, super target right in the middle of the e-learning ecosystem. So I'm going to tee it up for you. Where do podcasts fit into e-learning for you?
It's all about audio content. And to get a little more specific, it's all about an audio first content creation process. I think it's the most cost efficient and it's the most learner friendly, as we'll talk about today. It creates content in just about every format.
So make the case for me just off the top, right? We're on Zoom right now. Zoom's become everybody's little, golden child as classes have gone online and remote teams have gone online. Why is audio first? Why is that an important strategy in today's world?
Because audio content is the easiest to consume. It doesn't require our eyes.
Okay.
And so we can do it all the other times when we would normally be required to be focused on a task that maybe, say, washing the dishes
Mm-hmm.
or running.
Mm-hmm.
These are opportunities for learning where video and text content simply cannot work.
That's beautiful. We even suggest to individuals, who are on the show, it's like, hey, while you're walking the dog, or get the audio version of this. And when we did this in the e-learning success summit last April as well, but for those people who got the all access pass, there's podcast versions of all of the summit speakers. And we said, look, take this outside while you're doing stuff with the kids, or you're going to the park. That's a great strategy. How does one think about that from a content delivery? Does this mean that I've got to change the way I think about my course or what I'm delivering? Or
The same content.
Okay. So break it down for me. Like when you're thinking about an audio first strategy, where do you begin? You develop a course normally, and then you're just laying down the audio. You walk me through it. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah. So when I think about an audio first strategy, and I think about it specifically in regards to e-learning, I would first ask the question, is this something where we want to teach them a specific skill? Is this an audio course? Or is this something where we want it to be part of their ongoing education? And if it's more ongoing education, or if it's more of a general communication channel, then I think a podcast is more appropriate. And in other cases, I'd say an audio course. And from a delivery standpoint, it's the same.
So break those down for me, just for, so many of our audience are either traditional K through 12 teachers or higher education teachers. How do you differentiate between general education, something that's really niche, really specific, or maybe, that third category?
Yeah. So I would say if you were focused, for example, on teaching a specific lesson in a textbook, something where you can have a defined outline with a start and an end,
Mm-hmm.
that is likely best served by an audio course format.
Okay.
And you can set it up and plan it just like you would a course. Think of it like you're planning a lecture that has no slides.
Okay.
And then you'll end up with a piece of audio that can be delivered and consumed on demand. And once you add in the slides, you've got video. And when you transcribe it, you've got text.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly you can start breaking up the text and you can start reworking it. And you have all of the formats that you could possibly want, just cookie cuttered out of it.
So it's really actually thinking about it sort of backwards forward rather than forwards backwards. And most people say, look, I'm going to stand up in front of a class, I'm going to deliver this. And then how do we pull out the audio? How do we pull out the notes? And you're just saying, look, do the audio first, and the notes and the slide deck and whatnot, they follow from that.
Yeah. I mean, if you plan an audio course that somebody's going to listen to as a recorded version, and you create that audio course, you are doing something wrong if you cannot then give a live lecture on the same subject.
I was going to say, if you can nail it in the audio, then it seems like the text and the video would flow from there. And, they're kind of no-brainers at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think the real secret is that audio is our primary communication channel.
What do you justify that for me? What do you mean? So when you say our, what do you mean by that?
Humanity. I think we use audio to develop and communicate most sophisticated concepts, which is what most of education is about. Like, yes, we communicate heavily with body language, but that is not the same kind of communication that we use in education.
Ooh, I'm gonna challenge you on that one. So give me Can you give me a specific example of what you mean by we use audio to communicate first, even before nonverbal communication, those kinds of things?
Yeah. Would it be easier for you to write up how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, tell me how to make it right now, or draw out how to make it graphically?
It's a good question. I don't know. I could probably tell you how to. It would be most convenient, especially in this format right now, for me to just tell you. I guarantee that. All right. All right.
And when you write, at least when I write these days, I actually outline and then dictate and then edit to get to my first draft. That's because I work with audio so much that I've naturally now moved to that approach. But I think many people talk through their ideas to themselves before they put them to paper.
Take me through that again. Like, 'cause I don't want that to be just kind of become a blip in this conversation. I think you've just maybe put a strategy out there that many of our listeners could use in their daily lives. Just sort of walk me through what is that? So first an outline, then you sit down and you just sort of dictate to yourself, you get a transcript, and then you edit from there. Like, is it that simple, or?
Yeah, it's just that simple.
What is that? And do most people do it through a different process? I'm thinking about myself when, okay, so I outline a paper and then then I type it, and then maybe I would record audio later. But you're finding that you've adopted voice so much that that's your starting point.
Yeah. I'll generally work on an outline in the morning, and then I'll take a morning walk and I'll narrate on the walk. And then I'll go home, I'll shower, have lunch, come back, take the transcript, and edit it that afternoon.
So
I'm big about walking and talking. And even when I'm alone, I prefer to talk in a dialogue when I'm doing that sort of work. It takes a little bit of mental bandwidth to hold two sides separate like that. But I found it's a really useful skill, and methodology develops a really strong audio for conversion to text later.
Have you found that potentially also helps your public speaking, your communication in a format like this, or even like maybe when you're working with sales or, clients or those kinds of things?
Yeah. My speech has gotten infinitely more precise over time as a result, because I'm speaking to right now.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed that you don't use ums thus far. And so that's always one of those things that we're always conscious of when we're in a public speaking format, right? How are we pacing the time between thoughts? And someone who has spent the time to do that mental exercise usually doesn't have those little idiosyncrasies.
Also, keep in mind, I'm a 5-year podcast agency owner.
Touche. All right.
I hope I've gotten better at this over time.
Hopefully. Well, so take me to give me the contrarian view. So, there's going to be people who say, I'm not an audio learner. And so, the audio first doesn't work for me, and I don't think it's going to work for my students. Or maybe take me through some of the pitfalls. Like, where are the gaps in an audio first strategy that you want to make sure that you've either seen in the past or that you can foresee coming down the pipe?
Planning, not planning enough. Not spending enough time on making it actually kind of entertaining. Never listening to the recordings yourself. I've been working on an audio course for about a month and a half, 2 months now.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I haven't published it yet is because I listen to it every day and then I tweak something. I keep going back.
Yeah. Do you find that happens a lot with either the podcasters you work with or the e-learning specialists that you work with, where they produce something, they send it off to either their design team or their production team, and then poof, they've never listened to it?
Podcasters, yes. Audio courses, no. We have and I see this with educators who cross over into podcasting early on also, where they get caught up on sounding perfect.
Mm.
And the beauty of podcasting is a conversation. That's really the core of the content and the channel. That's what most people are expecting when they download a podcast. Even if it's a single person talking, they're still expecting it to be positioned in such a way that they can have a conversation back to that lecture to some extent. We
Break that down a little bit before. I'm not sure I mentally get that.
So we talk about it as a sermon almost. It's
Okay.
not quite a lecture. It's got a purpose. It's got something you can chew on in there, and it's meant to keep you thinking about it. It's meant to have you come back and interact with the speaker, ideally.
Okay.
And so it's just a little different formatting because people listen to other people to have conversations or to hear them that they aren't having.
Absolutely. All right. Talk to me about the individual who's listening right now who says, look, maybe I don't want to do my physics course as an audio first, or maybe
Physics might be a more difficult one.
All right. So physics, mathematics, maybe some of the hard sciences, these kinds of things. But even I'm thinking woodworking, right? Where you want to see, hey, this is what a lathe looks like. This is what, I can see that. Make the case for me where that general education type of podcast would make sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think woodworking is a good example, but I'm going to use baking because I'm a bread baker and have been for most of my life now.
Okay.
There is so much science and so much history and deeper understanding that goes into making bread that you could listen to a podcast for a year just on the practice of making bread before you ever made your first loaf and still be learning new things.
Wow.
It might not be interesting to you in that case, but it's certainly possible. I mean, and I know there's vast differences in woodworking when you get into some of the more complex crafts and some of the more detailed work, the different tools and traditions. I assume every region of the world has its own native form of woodworking that has its unique cultural heritage to it. I know I just learned about in bread that rye bread rye doesn't have enough gluten to make the bread chewy, and it works on a totally different chemical process.
Now I'm kind of wishing that I had a cooking show and I actually have a good friend who does a cooking show. Maybe I need to connect you with him, but that's fantastic.
Only bread for me.
So I can see, let's just say I'm the physics professor. I'm the woodworking professor. Let's not even say professor. I want to provide those really specific, either learning, courses or, I've got a real specific niche that I want to fill there. I can see a general learning podcast as a way to warm the learners up or bring people in. Talk to me about marketing in that case. You've been in podcasting for more than 5 years now. Where does the podcast fit in a credibility piece, a lead generator, bringing people into a funnel, that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So from the funnel perspective, the podcast itself is best served as either an equivalent or a step deeper than a newsletter subscriber. And I say a step deeper because there's more dedication involved in listening to a podcast regularly compared to subscribing and reading a newsletter. From a growth perspective, people's first interaction point will not be with the entire podcast almost ever. Word of mouth is the best way to grow a show. It's also the hardest and the slowest. I'm a big fan of ads when you have the money, because if people are interested in something and you put ads in front of them for a podcast about it, about 30% of them should be podcast listeners,
Mm.
assuming that you're targeting like a broad swath
Mhm.
of age groups. Once you get narrower, that number can go up or down.
And as I'm thinking about, an ad strategy, or, do I think about bringing people into a podcast and warming them up, and then in the podcast and then selling them into a course? Or is it all part of the same ecosystem? Like I'm trying to think through that right now.
Yeah. So podcast to course works. Podcast to premium podcast or community works very well also. Podcast to course with community that has a subscribed version, I think, is probably the perfect combo, so to speak.
Okay. Do you have any good examples of podcasters that are doing this right now? Do you have any courses that are sitting either through Call for Content or Podcast 360 that you're working on right now?
None that I'm allowed to talk about.
Oh, that's too bad. Do you have, well, let me ask you this. When's the last time that you've found a podcast or an audio course where that you didn't produce, that didn't come out of your ecosystem, that you're like, man, that they just killed it?
Yeah. So Sean Puri over at My First Million
Okay.
launched the All Access Pass community out, like first announced it on the podcast. Last I checked, they were doing well over 30,000 a month,
Wow.
and they are under 3 months old.
No, wow, good for them. Do you have
Yeah.
any idea, like, what does that translate to in terms of numbers? Is, what's an average order value for that? Or,
So those are 200 a month subscribers.
Wow, that's a nice community conversion.
I'd guess that the show is in the low 100,000s of listens per episode. So it's a big show, but it's a high priced community.
Sure. And what did they, I don't know if you know this, but did they start with that community, or was this, we've got an idea, we have a really targeted audience that we want to find, and they just went out and did a big ad spend to build that quickly? Or did they, leapfrog off of something, or stand on the shoulders of another project?
Yeah. So they launched the podcast. Sean reached out to the team over at The Hustle, which is a really popular internet newsletter, and said, hey, you don't have a podcast. You want to make one with me? And so he piggybacked on their audience to get going.
Okay.
And partnered with them.
Fantastic. So that's, it's always something that, especially in the academic community, many people in the corporate L&D world won't have the option, but many people in the academic world will. It's like, they have great ideas. They are experts in what they do, but then actually flexing the muscle of marketing and flexing the muscle of partnerships and whatnot to bring that expertise to the greater good, or the greater community, is something that's missed. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the easy way to solve that, is the hack that Sean used, right? Just find a major media company and partner with them.
Sure. Yeah. If I can tap into your 1 million subscribers, would you mind if I just raise my hand and bring them into my course?
Yeah. Like that would be fantastic. Obviously that explosive of a case is probably not possible for most, but if you're an expert in your field, people are selling things to people who are interested in your field, and they will pay for your expertise to be associated with their brand.
For sure.
And so I think that's really the crossover that you want to look for. Find somebody who's already good at the marketing, who has that, and be like, hey, you really need that doctorate on your page.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I can beat that one.
That level of credibility and that level of endorsement of knowledge is critical. Michael, you've been doing this for 5 years, at least the podcasting piece.
Yep.
You espouse an audio first content, or an audio first strategy for building out, which I got to say, we haven't heard it on this podcast before. And I love it. Just from the first, taste of it, it just makes a lot of sense to my brain.
Well, I bought Audio First Summit, so we'll see where that goes.
Fantastic. What do you see? I've been asking this on everybody in the show, kind of a wrap up is, what do you see coming down the pipe 6 months from now, a year from now? Is there a shiny new object you're super excited about? Is there a strategy you're super excited about that you can give us a hint on to look out for?
Yeah, we're going no code. I hired our first developer about 3 months ago. Podcast 360 is the first thing we've launched out of it. It's entirely built in Webflow and ClickUp. And so we can have an affiliate program with it, which I'm really excited about. But then that's allowing us to now build an ecosystem of tools around audio content, where we're looking at a podcast valuation app is the next thing we're dropping. And then it's going to be a whole podcast hosting ecosystem specifically for delivering audio courses and interactive audio content to an audience. Because we worked with coaches at the beginning and audio works great for them, but nobody has a good way to sell audio. Or at least a few people do, but they're kind of expensive.
Fantastic. Michael, Chief Strategist at Call for Content, Podcast 360. This has been a truly eye-opening or ear-opening and fascinating conversation. I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the E-Learning Podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with one or two of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the E-Learning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, you can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.